Hands workshop. Welcome everybody. Best of Missouri Hands workshop, mini workshop, building a successful painting from start to finish with Lorraine McFarland. I'm Allison Norfleet Ringer, and helping out today is Kim Carr and Wanda Tyner today. Little housekeeping. We're going to actually kind of change it up. If you want to stay muted during the time frame through most of it, but if you do have a question during her presentation, unmute yourself and then you will be able to go ahead and she says, please ask questions. So, but just in case, if you don't want to do it that way, there is a chat feature at the bottom. There's a little chat button at the bottom of your taskbar. You can always type it into chat and we'll try to also take a look at that and make sure that people's questions get answered that way as well. And again, today's Best of Missouri Hands member is Lorraine McFarland, who will be doing our wonderful workshop. And Lorraine, you can take it away.
Well, Lois, Lori, Annie, thank you for coming back today. I'm excited that you're excited. Today in this session, in this demo, I'm going to hopefully I'll do more demo today than slides on the screen. We're going to use the thumbnail sketch that I chose on Monday, and I'll demonstrate how to move to the next step in the process of building a successful painting. The design and composition and values were all worked out in that thumbnail. So now you can use it to build your underpainting, and I'll describe and demonstrate the different choices you can make in rendering your underpainting to help you achieve the feel of the finished painting. So the first decision that you'll make about underpainting is, what do you want the feel of that final painting to be? Hi, Kitty. For instance, what do you want the mood of the painting to be like? Especially for a figurative or a landscape painting, the mood can be quite important. You want to consider light, weather, and atmosphere or depth if you're painting a landscape. And energy or movement is a consideration, especially in a portrait painting or in a figure painting. And energy is also important in a cityscape or an urban scene or elements in nature. If you're painting landscape elements in nature, such as fire or water or wind. So the feel informs, when you decide on a feel for your final painting, that informs your next decisions. And the choices to be made are about color and value. Do you want to use warm or cool color for your underpainting? Do you want to use local color? Do you want to use complementary color? Do you want to use monochrome or something else? The possibilities are really endless for your underpainting. And like I said on Monday, as long as you have your values correct, you can use any colors you want in your painting for any element. If your values are correct, especially in a landscape painting, you're going to have a successful painting. So whatever you choose, you want to stay true to the values in your thumbnail sketch. So let's look at a few of my paintings to see how I approach these decisions. And I'm just going to do about 4 slides today, and then I'm going to switch cameras and start demonstrating. So give me a second here. It's going to take a minute to open up. Okay, let me get this. Can everybody see that?
No.
No? Okay, let me go back and,
I can see your screen.
you can?
Yeah, but Lori said she can't.
There, I can
Got
see
it?
it, yes.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
let me make sure, yeah, okay, so as I mentioned before, in an underpainting, you can choose just about any color that you want as long as the values are correct. For this dog portrait, in the original photo, I could see that this lab, even though he was quite light, his undercoat had a lot of golden color in it. So because that's a little bit darker than what the final result is, I decided to make that my lightest value in the dog. And then for the shadow areas, I chose a cool gray. And for the tongue, the purple was a warmer color. So even though his tongue is quite pink, the folds and the little intricacies of his tongue were actually in the end were defined by that purple underpainting showing through. Now, the background of this painting, when I do a portrait, whether it be of a person or an animal, I like to do the animal first and then make a decision about the background. And that, you know, you want to consider energy in that decision, because this dog was a hunting dog, and they're high energy, right? So if I was doing an informal portrait of this dog, I probably would have ended up with a less smooth and less formal background. But I did want to include in that background some of the colors of the underpainting in the dog. So you can see the start of the background on the left there. And in the end, it got pretty muted, but if you look closely, you can still see some of that color peeking through. You guys saw this one on Monday, and in this underpainting, my choices were for the foreground to stay with local color and keep it warm so that the foreground would come, you know, as warm colors in a painting will come towards you and cool colors will recede. So I chose the local color and it's warm. And then for the first passage of trees in front of the barn and the little house there, my underpainting was warm and it was complementary color. Now for foliage, I really love to use complementary color. You probably all know that when you put complementary colors next to each other, they emphasize each other. So a lot of times, you know, especially if you're a pastel artist, I think this is true also of wet mediums, watercolor, acrylic, oil. Sometimes it's really hard to get some variety in your greens. And here in Missouri and in the Midwest, when you're painting a landscape, it's like dominated by greens. So I really strive to get some variety in those greens. And this is a great way to do that, to use either a complementary or a split complementary underpainting and let some of that peek through. Now,
excuse
yes.
me, Lorraine, just curious, getting one question from Lori. Can you please explain what local colors mean when you're saying local colors?
Local color is the color that you see. So in the photograph, or when I was on site here, these, whoops, sorry about that. This foreground field and that little field to the left behind it, that was soybeans. It was fall, and that was soybeans. And you know how soybeans turn that brilliant orange color or gold color in the fall. That was what I was referring to. The local color in the trees is more green. And like, for instance, the roof of the barn was reddish. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Lois?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. So the distant line of trees is, because it's far away, I chose to use a cooler underpainting so that I would be able to eventually keep that pushed back and give some depth to the painting in the end. This painting is a combination of complementary color underpainting and local color. In the foreground, I've used a lot of warm complementaries for the rocks and the grasses. In that puddle of water in the stream there, I used more local color. It was kind of a, well, you know what water looks like in a stream like that. If it's not reflecting a lot of the blue sky and it's in the shade, it's going to be more greenish, or depending on what the substrate is, it might be more brownish. Excuse me. And then for the foreground trees on the right and some of the trees over there on the left, I started out with a reddish or a warm purple red or red purple, because I wanted those trees to be in the front and come forward in my final painting. But for the trees in the background, I used a cooler violet, and for the shadows, I used a cooler violet. And I hope you guys can see on my screen, these are not that big, but I hope you guys can see. I wish you could see these in person, because if you were looking closely at these in person, you could see the underpainting peeking through. I think you can here. This was painted on a panel that I made myself. If you look at the sky, you can kind of see what looks like brush strokes. I sometimes make my own panels with gesso mixed with granite dust or aluminum oxide granules, and I paint that on, and I use an old hardware store brush, and it makes a texture on the surface. When I pass my pastels over that texture, it's really effective in just catching all those, you've got the hills and valleys of the texture. So when you pass a pastel over the top lightly, it catches those hills and not the valleys. So your underpainting is peeking through, and you can see the pink in the sky. I like to use pink in my sky a lot, because, especially on a sunny day, because it gives it some warmth. And then this is an example of a watercolor underpainting, which is something I really love to do. And since I think we have a watercolorist here today, I'm going to go ahead and do a watercolor underpainting. And in this painting, I used some local color in the foreground, well, close to local color. I didn't use a complementary color, and the same for the river and the background trees, more closely related to the actual local hue. But in the trees, again, I used complementary color, because I like to have that variety in my greens. That those white splotches you see in the watercolor underpainting on the upper right are an artifact of the photographs, so you can ignore those. But although this painting I think was pretty successful, I wish I had used a pink for the sky instead of the blue, or yeah, it's kind of a light blue. I think it would have been more effective to put the blue over the pink than the pink over the blue, but you know, live and learn. So, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Anybody have any questions about what I just showed you?
Yes. When you said you used a panel, what was your panel?
Oh, I have a bunch of gator board that I bought from a retiring photographer. I was very lucky to get a bunch of it, and it's kind of expensive, but gator board is kind of like foam core, but it has a less permeable surface. It's waterproof or liquid proof, and it's just more sturdy. So I paint that first with just a coat of gesso to seal it and make it archival. And then I'll mix up my grit and I'll paint that on next. Anybody else have any questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So before we move to the easel, I just want to say there's so many different choices that you can make. And with our limited time, I'm not sure I'll get through more than a couple. So what I'm going to do we have a watercolor? Do one of you work in watercolor? Okay. Well, the first demo I'm going to do is going to be watercolor, but it would apply for oil. You could thin down your oils, or acrylics. You could thin down your acrylics, and it's basically the same kind of concept. Now, what you do on top of that, I have to admit, you probably know more about that than I do. But the whole point is to let some of that underpainting show through as you progress through your painting. Okay, so now I'm going, oh, and by the way, a word about warm and cool. Sometimes I will tone my canvas, my board or my paper. I will tone it. And if, say for instance, it's a really sunny day, I might tone it a brilliant gold or a brilliant orange or even red or bright pink. I really, really like to do that kind of thing. I think it makes a big difference because you know how the concept of simultaneous contrast, when nothing is what it is until it has a relationship. So if you put a cool color next to a warm color, the cool color is going to look cooler and the warmer color is going to look warmer. If you put a dark value next to a light value, the light value is going to look lighter and the dark value is going to look darker. So all of those things kind of figure into what you want to do with your underpainting. Also, mood. If I'm, say for instance, you know, the photograph that we're going to use today, this one that we worked on Monday, it was an overcast day, and it was, you know, the colors were saturated, but in general, if I want to make my painting look like an overcast day, I'm probably going to use cool colors in my underpainting. If I want to make my painting look more like a sunny day, and you can do that. You have artistic license, right? In fact, that's what I'm going to do with this painting. I don't want it to look overcast. I want it to look like there's some dramatic light. So when I get to my pastel underpainting, I'll show you how I'm going to do that. So I'm going to use warm colors for that. And you can use a monochrome. You know, you could just use three values of blue or purple for a cool, and you could use 3 values of an orange or red for a warm underpainting. Well, I'm going to mix it up today, where I'll use a little bit of complementary and a little bit of local, just so you can kind of see all of the different ways to do it. So I'm going to switch now, switch my camera. Can everybody see my easel now? Okay. And excuse me. I've got my watercolor palette here. And as you can see, I've got my underpaint or my thumbnail sketch from Monday. Let me change my view here. Oops. Wanda, when I change view to speaker, I'm seeing Lois. Am I doing something wrong?
No, but how about if I'll take care of that? I'll, if everybody wants, I will just spotlight you.
Okay.
How's
Okay.
everybody seeing,
Yeah, that's better for me.
everybody seeing
Everybody else
her
okay?
painting up big? Okay.
Yeah, that's better for me. Okay, so I have my watercolor palette here. And I'm just going to kind of work through my decisions. I thought about this ahead of time, but I haven't really made my decisions yet about exactly what I'm going to do. So we'll talk through it. Okay, so in the photograph, we've got a lot of blues and greens, some warm greens here, a little bit of warm green here. This gravel bar and the rocks, excuse me, the gravel bars, I see a bit of pink in there. Over here, it's just kind of a neutral browns and grays. And of course, the water and the sky are our lightest values. And because it's overcast, they look pretty gray and dull, but we're going to get inventive with that. So I usually try to start with my lightest values if I'm doing a watercolor underpainting for a pastel painting. Now, I like to use a white surface for watercolor underpainting for the reasons, obvious reasons. Watercolor is so transparent that if you try to do a watercolor underpainting on a surface that is not white, what you get is not going to look quite like what you expected, right? Because you're going to be seeing through to that color underneath. But what I'm going to start with is just a very pale pink in the sky. Even though we left the white of the paper in the thumbnail sketch, that doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be in my underpainting. I don't want a white underpainting for my thumbnail sketch, or I'm sorry, for my underpainting. I want it to be more, I want it to be more, a little bit warmer. I'm going to make this a sunny day. So, and I'm erasing my grid lines here because when you use watercolor, they'll show through quite a bit. I like to use a grid just to help me along with my drawing. It speeds things up. And please don't hesitate to yell out if you have any kind of questions while I'm doing this. I might get a little quiet here. The first thing I'm going to do is just mix up I'm going to use alizarin crimson. And I just dipped into my cad red. Wrong one. So I'm starting over here. I'm going to water down some alizarin crimson. And I'll try to mix up as much as I'm going to need for that big area of the sky all at once. And I'm using I've got a little spray bottle that just helps me to make a puddle in my palette. Put some pigment in there and then add some water to it. And then I put this swatch of paper over here to the right so that I could test before I actually go to my painting. So that's way too saturated. So I'm going to add some more water. I want a very, very, very pale pink in that watercolor underpainting for the sky. That's better. And, you know, I'm not going to be too concerned about being neat. Oh, and by the way, I guess you guys can see that I've already done my drawing on here. And I just basically copied my thumbnail sketch. And each time I dip into my color, I'm going to test to make sure I haven't got too much pigment. And, you know, when we were little, I don't know about you guys, but I was one of those people, one of those kids who always had to be very neat in my coloring books and not go outside the lines. But I'm not like that now, especially for underpaintings. You just don't need it to be that neat and tidy. Okay, so I'm going to rinse my brush out. And I'm going to go to the next lighter value or the next darker value. Oh, wait, we got to put some of that pink in the water, right? Because the water is reflecting the sky. Now, the water will be a little bit darker than the sky, just a little. So I'm going to add a little more pigment. And this part of the water here. And you know what? If you're during your watercolor underpainting, if while you're doing it, you get some drips, don't worry about it. Sometimes drips are really fun. Am I getting in front of the camera? Oh, good, it's working. I once saw Richard McKinley. He's my favorite teacher and mentor. I once saw Richard McKinley turn watercolor drips into tree trunks. That was pretty cool. He never touched that part of the painting after his underpainting. He just made those things tree trunks. That was really fun. Okay. Next, we'll go to the number 2 values. That was our number 1 value, the sky and the lake or the pond or river puddle. Now we're going to go to the number 2 value, which is going to be this passage here, the warm greens of the meadow or the field, and then the pinkish color of the gravel bar. And as you can see, I'm using a pretty big brush. And I'm going to use the big brush here, but when I get into these smaller areas, I'm going to switch to a little bit smaller brush. But you should stick to pretty big brushes just so that you don't get too caught up in detail. So because the gravel bar is close to us. It's in the foreground. I'm going to use a little bit warmer color here. And I think what I'll do is I'll just take a little bit of that pink from the alizarin crimson. And I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. I'm going to try the lemon yellow and see what I get. Ultimately, what I want is like a coral. That's what I'm thinking, is a coral color. And I want it to be a step or two darker in value than my sky and my water. So I'll test over here. And if I really squint and look at that, it's not quite, might be a little bit darker in value, but I'm going to go ahead and add some more alizarin. That's better. Now, when you're doing this, one of the things that you can do is take a photograph of what you've done here and change that photograph to a black and white. And then you'll be able to see more clearly if you've got your value correct. Okay, so we're going to go in here. And fill in the number 2 values of the gravel bar. And these may become water, I'm not sure yet. And, you know, no big deal if we have to correct that later, but I'm thinking those are going to be rocks. The light color of the rocks in the gravel bar. And I wanted to make that a little warmer because those rocks and the gravel bar is in the foreground. But back here, now I have to make the decision. Do I want that to be as warm as this? Do I want it to be warmer? Do I want it to be less warm? Well, because there are greens there, I think I'm going to go ahead and punch up the red. Now, this should be the same value as the rocks and the gravel. So I'm going to try a swatch right here. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit more red. A little more pigment, less water. Yeah, that looks good. So that will be this field. And then we've got this warm tree over here and some warmth in the, well, we're not gonna, well, yeah, we probably ought to go ahead and put that in. I'm gonna go over that pink in the water to indicate that reflection. Oh, I don't need to. This is where it is. It's right here. It's this group or this shape right here is that reflection in the water. And then even though I didn't make a delineation in my thumbnail sketch, I made this all dark here. There is some light foreground. There are some light trees in the foreground here. But because in pastels we work dark to light, I'm just going to include that value in this shape here as a dark value. So I think we're finished with this particular red. Same here. There's some warmer greens here in this shape. But I'm going to include that in that darkest value because we are grouping values, like values together right now. And we'll make those subtle changes when we finish the painting. Okay, so we're done with the number 2 values, and I'm going to move on to the number 3 values. That's all these dark shapes. And I'm going to make these dark shapes in the foreground warmer for the same reason as I chose warm colors for these things. It's the foreground. So decisions to be made about color here. I think I'll go with maybe like a burnt sienna or yeah, something like that. And then back in here for these shapes, I'm going to go to a cooler color. So let me get into some warm color that's darker in value. And because I don't work a lot in wet mediums, except for underpaintings, I'm not that skilled at mixing colors, and I'm not very good at remembering the colors that I'm using. So I'm going to show you my palette here, and this is the brown that I'm dipping into. I'm not sure if that's burnt sienna or burnt umber, but that's what I'm dipping into, and I'm going to mix that up and see if my value is another step or 2 darker than the color that I just put down. Nope, that probably could be a little darker, so I'm going to add more pigment. Okay, if I squint, I can see that that's definitely a darker value than the last value that I worked with. So we're just going to fill in all these areas up here that I didn't use or that I haven't filled in. And actually it kind of peeks back through here and comes up here. So we're going to you know what? I'm going to go over those spots because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them yet. And I can always make a decision about that later. It helps to be flexible when you're doing your underpainting. Now that I've got that down on my paper, it still looks a little light to me, so I'm going to add still more pigment. And you know what? I'm going to add a little bit of Payne's gray, just a tiny dab. Oh, wow. Payne's gray is so powerful. I put a little too much in, so I'm going to go back into my brown. That's better. So I'm going to make another passage here. Pass over this again to darken it up some. Okay, I'm squinting again and looking to check my values. Another thing, I think I already mentioned this, you can do is take a photo and convert it to black and white to make sure that your values are spot on. Okay, so those are my number 3 values in the foreground. And now we're going to move to the number, I'm sorry, those are number 4 values. I hope you're not totally confused. 1, 2, 3, I'm sorry, 3, 4. These are our darkest values. And so I'm sorry, I was thinking 3, I meant 4. 3 is going to be that distant line of trees, which is going to be a little bit lighter than this darkest value. So let's go ahead and get those in. Now I'm going to move to a smaller brush. These are just regular all-purpose acrylic watercolor brushes. And I'm going to use, I want those trees to be pushed back, but again, this was a overcast day, so I'm not sure I want them to be too cool. So I think I'm gonna aim for a dark violet, which I'm going to mix with ultramarine blue. And let's see what alizarin crimson does. Mix some alizarin with that. Ooh, that's pretty. See if that is darker than my number 3 value. And if I squint, yes, indeed, that is darker. So I'm going to go with that. Still using my big brush for this shape here. And just for fun, I'm gonna get a little more water and maybe let some things drip. Although the paint has a mind of its own, right? Those little puddles, I'm just gonna leave them because, you know, at the base of the trees are probably gonna be darker anyway. Okay, now I'm gonna switch that smaller brush and use a cool blue for those background trees. And they need to be a step lighter in value than that purple, a step or two lighter. So what happens? That's not quite light or dark enough. Excuse me. I think that could work. And this is a small shape, so I'm gonna use a small brush. Now we're getting a little bit of dripping. I like drips and bleeding. That's kind of fun when you're doing an underpainting. Okay, so I'm stepping back now and I'm looking at this and I see that my water surface here is actually lighter, a little bit lighter than this up here. So I think I'm going to just go over that with the same color that I used before, if I can manage to mix up the same color. I just want it to be just a bit darker in value, because if you know about Carlson's rules of light in the landscape, generally the sky is the lightest value in a landscape. The flat ground plane is going to be the next darker, because it reflects the sky, but obviously is not going to be as bright as the sky, the source of the light. So give me a sec here. I gotta wipe my palette. I've run out of puddles, or run out of wells. I had to clean a well up. Okay, so I'm going back into the alizarin crimson again. And I'm not going to make it, I don't want too much pigment, but I do want to put another bit of pigment on there. Now, if you're going to do this, if you're going to put a second layer of pigment, your first layer should be dry. Otherwise, it's not going to work as well. There we go. There's a drip. Okay, so that's the watercolor underpainting. And oh my goodness, we only have 5 minutes, but I worked out all my colors on the pastel underpainting before, so it won't take as long. It'll go pretty quickly. Just give me a second while I switch to my other drawing.
While you're switching, there was a question, what painting surface are you using for this piece?
This piece is Art Spectrum Colourfix. It's either white or natural. Not sure if it's the white or the natural.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, so this time, since I'm going to be using pastels, whoops, we need to get our other photo. You guys will get a little bit of info about pastels. I hope and I think that it will be applicable to your medium as well. So I've got an 11 by 14 here because I thought for the finished painting, I'd want to work bigger for you guys. So this paper is Uart 400 grit. It comes in different grits, which means it just has a more coarse surface to it. Pastel paper is like sandpaper, most of it. This is my go-to paper. It's one of my favorites. And I want to show you quickly how I chose my colors. I'm going to share my screen. Oops, sorry. Kim, I'm going to go a little bit over 11 o'clock, but it's not going to be too long. Is that okay?
That's okay, Lorraine. If people need to drop, they will.
Okay. I'm going to hurry. Well, I'll skip this step so we can get going. What I wanted to show you was these are the colors I chose for my underpainting. This represents the 1 in underpainting. This represents the 2. This represents the 3. And this I'm sorry, the thumbnail. This represents the 1 in the thumbnail, the 2 in the thumbnail, the number 3 value in the thumbnail, and the number 4 value in the thumbnail. And I actually took a photograph of this in black and white to check it. And my values were just right. So I'm going to go really fast here. This I'm pretty good at. So, and I'll just show you how this works. With pastel, we always start with our dark values first. So I've got my darkest value, and I'm just going to fill in those shapes that I assigned the number 4 value to. And as you can see, I'm not being precious about it. I'm not worried about staying inside the lines like I did when I was a kid in the coloring books. I'm more concerned with just getting it done. Because I'm a plein air artist, I had to learn to do all of this stuff really fast. And it's easier for me with pastel. And in this case, I decided I was just going to use the same colors for my number 3 value in both places. Wait a minute. I'm throwing myself off. That's not right. I decided to use a warm dark value here. So this is a kneaded eraser. It'll do a pretty good job of lifting pastel off of a surface. I'm not too concerned about getting it all off, but I did make a mistake there. So I'm going to start over with that passage. And let me put this up here. These are my values. So this is what I chose for the rocks. No, okay. Okay, I messed up. Sorry about that. I was right the first time. We're just going to go over this with this color. This is my dark value in the foreground.
Oh, because it's one.
That's why it's good to have your little thumbnail with your numbers. And I probably should have put my numbers on here. That would have helped. Okay, so those are my number 4 values. I'm done with that. Next slider value is my number 3 value, which are those distant trees. Now with pastels, we need to start our paintings with the harder pastels. Pastels have a range. They're called soft pastels, but within the range, within soft pastels, there is a range from harder to softer. And I'm using brands here that are a harder pastel because they won't fill the tooth of the paper as fast as if I were to use a softer pastel. Sky. Pink. Trying not to pick up, sometimes I run into those other colors and I pick up a little bit of it and it gets contaminated. The color I'm working with gets contaminated. So you can see that blue on here. You can see that blue on the pastel stick. I wear an old sock on my hand, cut a hole in the heel for my thumb. And it's a great tool for wiping off and cleaning your pastels. Water. Just using the same one as the sky here. I can darken it up later. And I wanted to use for number 2 value, my gravel bar and my field here, a warm color, because as I said before, I want to turn this into a sunny day. The reflection in the pond. Okay, so what I can do here, and as a pastel artist, this is important. I can fix this underpainting by using a liquid on it. And you can use water, you can use terpenoid, you can use mineral spirits. Or another thing you can do, you don't have to wet it if you don't want to. You can use some foam. This is actually the same as pipe insulation foam that you can buy at hardware stores. it's round. This is actually from a pool noodle. It works too. But you can use this to blend all of this color and push it into the tooth of the paper. Now you get a pretty good permanent underpainting that way, but it's not as permanent as if you wet it. And the reason you want it to be permanent is because you don't want it to blend with another layer of pastel when you pass another layer of pastel over it. And I like to blend like this. I use a clean piece of foam for each color. I like to go ahead and blend it before I wet it, but you can stop at this point if you want. You can just blend it like this with the foam and you're done with your underpainting and you can move on to the finish. I like to go ahead and wet them because basically what that does is it turns the pigment into a wet pigment. And when you wet it becomes like a liquid pigment, like paint, like the watercolor. And then you're really assured by that when you start passing pastel over that underpainting, you're not going to get any blending, and it's really effective in letting that underpainting show through. I like to blend it like this because it kind of gets in all those nooks and crannies of the tooth of the paper and covers up all of that white underneath. Your goal is to cover up all of the light color of the paper. So we could stop here if we wanted, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start with my lightest value. Almost done here. Start with my lightest value. And I'm using drugstore alcohol. 70% isopropyl alcohol. And again, when I'm doing this, if I get drips, I call that serendipity. And we'll maybe use those drips. So lightest value first, so my brush doesn't get too dirty. And as you can see, I'm not being super neat about this. This is where you can scribble and have fun. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush and move into the next darker value. Ooh, those drips are going to be fun, I think. And this is an old, nasty hardware store brush. The tooth on this paper, it's like sandpaper. It can really tear up brushes. So you don't want to be using your good brushes to do this. I'm going to move to a smaller brush. This is an old oil painting brush that has been retired. Whoops, got a little messy there. Okay, and on to our darkest value. Now, as this dries, woo, got some big drips there. As this dries, whoops, it will look more like those original colors. It looks darker when it's wet, obviously. And I kind of like to make upward strokes where things grow up. We'll get that distant line of trees there. I pushed a little bit of that number 4 value in there, but that's okay. We can fix that later. Okay, so that's, whoops, we didn't do this. And I'm going to go ahead and try to clean this up a little bit. That's a little too much dripping there. I'm just putting a little bit of alcohol on there and patting. So that's it. That's pastel, a wet pastel underpainting. And that's where I want to end today, and we'll start on Friday with the finish. Let me unshare my screen. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh. Why am I not? Sorry, folks.
You're still sharing.
Yeah, where do I go to not share? What am I
Down
doing?
at the bottom where it says share screen. There you go. Nope, you're still sharing. The
Oh,
bottom-
stop.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think,
There you go. Nope, you had it.
I did?
Now you do. Stop. You got it.
Okay, because I'm still seeing my easel.
Nope.
Oh, I
Now
have
you're
to,
back to sharing
you have to
again.
turn that off first. Turn off the easel camera and then do the, I think I remember that from last time.
There you go.
so what do you think, guys? You got any questions? Everybody's smiling. I like that. So what do you think about all that? Did you learn stuff?
Nice job.
Pastels? Okay. Any questions? Oh, come on, guys. No questions? Okay.
I am
Is it,
curious.
is it,
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
like, how long does it take for that to dry?
Oh, that's why I use the alcohol. It dries very, very quickly. And also, it, especially on this paper and some of the other papers, if you use water, it will make it buckle if you get too generous with your water. Water works. You get a little, pretty much the same effect, but it can cause your paper to buckle, which, you know, it's a problem with pastels if your paper's buckled, because, you know, you're passing that flat piece of pigment over that paper, and if you've got a buckle, it's going to catch that high part and not the low part. So you don't want your paper to buckle. And that's another reason why I really tape my paper down really good, because I don't want it to move. And but with alcohol or mineral spirits or terpenoid, you're not going to get buckling. And there are papers out there that are not liquid proof. You cannot use a wet underpainting with them. I pretty much stick to the papers that you can do that with. But in some cases, you know, I might want to just do that rubbing in thing with the foam. And then I don't need to have a paper that will take a wet underpainting. The important thing to remember is not to use too heavy a hand. And if you're not going to wet it, because you don't want to fill the tooth of the paper. With pastels, if you fill the tooth of the paper, it's really hard to get another layer on top of the layers that you already have. It's all about the tooth when it comes to pastels. And a lot of times beginners they really want to press hard and they really want to get in there and blend everything. And I try to encourage my students to start with the harder pastels because they won't fill the tooth as fast, and save those softer pastels to the end for your darkest darks and lightest lights and your, what I call the candy at the end that makes your painting pop. And so it's important to use a light hand and the harder pastels. But if you're going to wet your underpainting, what I have here now is pretty much, I am getting some pigment still on my finger. But if I had not wet it with the pastel, with the alcohol, okay, so when I go over this dark, I'm not hardly getting any pastel on my finger at all. So when I wet it with the alcohol, it kind of, first of all, it brings back the tooth. It brings back the tooth. So you've got all that tooth there for more layers. And when I go over this with another color, for instance, I'll show you real quickly. When I go over this with another color, see what's happening? Can you see that okay? Or should I switch my camera? Let me switch my camera again. Sorry. Closer. So when you pass a pastel over this and it's been made permanent with the alcohol, that blue still shows through. If it wasn't wet, it would blend depending on how hard I press, it would blend. And this gives me a lot more texture. Let's see if I can get that even closer.
You might want to move it over a little.
This gives me more texture. Oh, I'm on the wrong side. Duh. Over here. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Yes. So see how I've passed that pastel over the top of that blue and that blue just still shines through. And look at the texture I'm getting. It almost paints the foliage just with one pass of the pastel. So that's what's really fun. And when I use those textured boards that I make, those are really effective at letting me get that textured feeling and making it look. I like to use. There's another paper that Richardson makes. Well, unfortunately, they discontinued it, and it was my favorite paper for getting texture in foliage. And a lot of pastel artists didn't like that paper. And so I guess that's why they discontinued it. When I heard they discontinued it, I bought up all I could. And if one of these days I'm going to run out of it, then I'll be sorry. But I do like my own boards that I make for that purpose too. Any more questions?
Just curious, Lorraine, add it near the end if you can, as you know, if there are certain papers or pastels and things, if we can maybe possibly near the end for the whole series, have a little list or like places that people can purchase that we are starting out, that we have some newbies, like,
Sure,
that we can get some of the supplies that you recommend as well.
sure. I can
And-
actually send you a hard copy of what I use in my like 2 and 3 day workshops
Mhm.
of my favorite
That would
supplies.
be great for everybody, or we'll actually try to link it up, or some sort of list, and we'll try to link that up for everybody.
Yeah,
as well.
I'll just send it like in a Word file or something and
That'll be awesome.
yeah. And in my long workshops, my 2 and 3 day workshops, the first morning is pretty much all about what I call my tools of mass construction. And I just get my supply boxes out and I just show everybody everything that I use and where you can get it and why you want it. And that's, you know, if you ever want to start painting in pastels, my workshop, my beginning workshops are super informative about that sort of thing. I mean, I spend a lot of time on that in the first day. And because you need to know those things in order to get the best results. If you don't have the right tools, you're not going to be able to do the job correctly, right? Just like a plumber. Any more questions?
Well, Lorraine, we sure appreciate you doing this, and I'm sorry I
Oh,
missed
it's
out
just-
on Monday and stuff, and
Oh,
but
no
you've
problem.
been, I think everybody's enjoying it, so.
Lois had a
Thank
question.
you.
Yes, Lois, you need to unmute. Unmute.
Okay, I'm unmuted. What kind of pastels are you using today?
Well, I have.
What brand?
Good question. I think what I have here is, I'm pretty sure that this one is a Terry Ludwig. No, I take that back. This is probably a Unison. This one is either a Gallery Mugno. Let's see. I'm holding it up to the wrong camera. What an idiot. I'm trying to hold it up to the camera that you're not seeing. That doesn't work. Okay. This is a Mugno Gallery semi-hard or a new pastel. And I'll send you a real good graphic that shows you the hard to the soft, at
Yeah.
least what Dakota Pastels sells. And this is a Rembrandt, which is a really good pastel. And this is probably a Mugno Gallery soft. The Mugno brand that's sold by Jerry's Artorama, they're the best buy for a beginner. They have five different varieties, I think. You want to ignore and stay away from the student grade. But I can specify in my handout that I'll send to you which ones I like. The Mugno Gallery semi-hard are really good, and the Mugno Gallery handmade soft. Now they have a Mugno Gallery soft, as opposed to the Mugno Gallery handmade soft. And the Mugno Gallery soft I don't like. But I'm going to turn my computer so you can see here.
I think you got disconnected, Lorraine.
Definitely frozen.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably pulled a plug or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Too much technology.
It's Wednesday.
It'll happen to the best of us, man. Know that feeling.
Well, I think that she can probably finish that up on Friday and
Friday.
stuff. So I hope you ladies have enjoyed. And
Yeah, thank
we'll
you.
come back on Friday and
Taking lots of
I'm
notes.
sure she'll answer any questions you have and help you finish up the painting and, so thank you.
I have a question.
everyone.
Are any of you guys that are painters actually doing an understudy, kind of following along with her, doing something on your own? we're just waiting till it's over.
I am.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's what you said. You got your easel started. I was like, whoa, go for it.
I started, but the photograph I'm using is different than hers, and it's like maybe way too detailed for a beginner.
Okay.
But I'm gonna try it anyway and just, see what happens.
Me
Cool.
too.
So maybe
Yeah.
on Friday, we can see where you're at.
And Andy, are you taking notes like me?
I'm sorry, you guys, I knocked my internet cable off.
Oh, I see it,
Oh,
Lori.
wow.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's from one of my photographs.
I don't think that's too detailed. I think you could, well, yeah,
It's
what you
just
need to do, Lori, is you need to, like your flower head, that's gotta
Mhm.
be just one big shape.
Okay. And what do I
maybe
do about like these spots on the butterfly's wing?
ignore them in your underpainting. And
Okay.
ignore them in your thumbnail. You want to concentrate on just like the whole contour of your butterfly, the outside boundaries of the butterfly, the contour drawing of it. That's all you would put down. It would be
Okay.
your darkest value in both your thumbnail and your underpainting.
Okay.
That makes sense? And
Yeah.
then as you work along, you go from that dark value to your lighter values. That's in pastel now, and it works, I think, in oils and acrylics, but not watercolor.
Right.
It's really hard to change from watercolor to pastel or pastel to watercolor, because in watercolor you work light to dark. In pastel you work dark to light. If you
Okay.
try to put
I'm gonna do pastels.
Okay, if you try to put a dark pastel over a light pastel, you're never going to get the dark you want. So that's why we reverse that. You really have to start with your darks, unless this is a rule of thumb, and rule of thumbs are made to be broken, right? For instance, I've got a really light color here, and if I hadn't fixed that, if I wanted to say put these tree branches in that are sticking out over here, I wouldn't be able to get the dark that I want. Now I've fixed this, so that's a way to break the rule. You can fix a light color and then put dark over it. But really, you really want to put your darks down first and then move gradually, incrementally move up to your lightest lights. And in pastels, your lightest lights and darkest darks go in at the end.
Okay. So like the circles on the butterfly's wings would go in last on the actual painting.
Yes. Yeah, that's also detail. Detail always goes at the last. You don't want to get caught up in detail, because when you start getting caught up in detail, your values, you're going to get all confused about your values.
Okay. I'm having a hard time with the value thing because I've never really drawn anything, or I haven't ever painted, so I'm getting a little messed up on.
Lori, value is the most difficult concept, in my opinion, for any artist to master. I still am working on it. I still feel that value is my biggest bugaboo when I'm struggling. So that's why it's really important to learn to do those thumbnail sketches and to try to break your subject down to a simple 5 or 6 shapes at the most.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should I do another thumbnail, do you think?
I think it might be easier for you to maybe follow along with us. Go ahead and download.
Well, I have been, but
okay.
I did this in between.
And actually, you could even choose. I have some photos that are really simple, 3 and 4 shapes. And if you'll email me, I will email you a photo in color, in black and white, that might be easier for you to break it down into big shapes and 3 to 4 values. I'll send that to all of you guys if you want. But
Okay.
I'll need a reminder. I'll try to do that as
Okay.
soon as I get off, but I've got some stuff I gotta do today, so,
Okay. Thank
Did
you. I
everybody
appreciate
get the
that.
PDFs from Monday?
pardon me?
Did everyone get the PDF from Monday?
I did.
I
Okay.
did.
Yeah, if you're working along with me, you can download that photograph and print it. And if you want to, if you can manage to change it to black and white, go ahead and change it to black and white and print it in black and white also.
Okay.
Anything else?
Can you use a workable fixative?
Yeah, now that's something that I thought about talking about today but because of the limited time I didn't. I covered that in my big workshops. Yeah, you can use a workable fixative to fix your underpainting. You don't want to use it if you're painting outdoors on a humid day because it gets kind of gummy. But remember I talked about that Richardson surface that they discontinued? When I do an underpainting on that surface, I use a workable fixative to fix it because it's got so much texture, it's so coarse that even if I wash it with alcohol or water or terpenoid, it doesn't want to cover all the white of the paper underneath or the color of the paper underneath. So I do use a workable fixative on that. And if I'm outdoors, after I spray it, I set it in a really bright sunny place and let the sun bake it dry. It takes a little bit dry than water or alcohol or terpenoid, but it's effective. And I also use workable fixative in my process sometimes. It's a way to get around the rule of using your soft pastels or your hard pastels first and not your soft, or if you get too many layers on and you can't get another layer over the top, you can use a workable fixative to give yourself some more surface. Now, it's interesting now, it's very important to remember that workable fixative, any fixative, most fixatives, I think there's some on the market that some claim don't do this, but it will darken your color. It will darken it quite a bit, and it makes it kind of muddy, you know. Actually, pastels are, if you look at a pastel under a microscope, it's kind of a crystalline structure. And if you spray it with a workable fixative, it will dull that, it will take that luminosity away. So I use it in the process, but I don't ever spray my paintings at the end. My paintings never get a fixative at the end. And if we have time on Friday, I'll talk about how I frame them. They get put right against the glass. And
Wow.
that's the way most masters do it. And that's the way most museums frame them. The pastels from the late 19th century, Degas, Renoir, Bertamoso, all of those old pastelists, back then, you know, there wasn't any such thing as fixative. So they framed their pieces right up against the glass. And I consider that to be the best, most archival way to frame a pastel. And I use music glass, which is extremely expensive, but it makes such a huge difference in the look of the work after you framed it, because there's virtually no reflection with museum glass. Many times people mistake my paintings for oils because they can't see the glass. So, and well, I'll explain the whole framing process on Friday. But unless you want to hear about it now.
I think we probably ought to save that for Friday.
Okay, sounds good. Okay,
All right,
Well-
Lois, happy birthday.
yeah.
Well,
Lois,
thank
happy
you.
birthday.
Enjoy your day.
Lois.
Celebrate.
On
Okay.
Friday, I'm gonna use this painting. I'm gonna use this underpainting and try to finish it to the best of my ability. And we'll talk about how to know when your painting is finished.
Okay.
Lorraine,
Sounds
thank you.
excellent.
I look forward to seeing part 3 on Friday. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Seeing everybody on
Bye.
Friday.